Do you remember what it felt like to be a little kid at Christmas time? There's nothing quite like the anticipation of Christmas morning. But the holiday can lose its wonder as we wake up to the many hard things going on in our lives and in the world. The loss we feel over our childhood experience points to a deeper longing inside all of us for everything sad to be undone and for us to live together with God in perfect joy. This fall, Rooted is releasing a new Advent devotional for teenagers with New Growth Press called Longing for Christmas. We look at 25 promises God made and fulfilled in the coming of Jesus. As we explore the way God has kept his promises, teenagers will be encouraged that all of the longing they feel for a better world and for things to be made right will be fully met in Jesus Christ.
You are listening to the Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable, part of the Rooted family of podcasts, advancing gospel-centered youth ministry for those serving in Asian American contexts and their students, equipping those serving to more effectively disciple students, and empowering families and churches to minister to Asian American youth more faithfully.
Hello, and welcome to the Rooted Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable. I am your host, Terrence Shay. I serve as the family pastor at First Chinese Baptist Church of Walnut in Southern California. Joining me today, again, are two friends who are youth pastors in the trenches, loving students, working with volunteers who are going to be on this panel, just answering questions and sharing their wisdom with us. So please go ahead and introduce yourself, starting with Huey.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here with you again. My name is Huey, and I serve at Christ Central Presbyterian Church in Centerville, Virginia, which is about 20 minutes west of DC. And I've been in youth ministry off and on for about maybe 17 years or so. And glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. I am Dorothy, and I'm the youth director at the Chinese Bible Church of Maryland in Rockville, Maryland, about 20 minutes north of DC. And I've been in youth ministry for about 15 years, starting from a volunteer to bivocational, then going into full-time now for the last 6 years. So it's been a journey, but I've been on multiple sides of the spectrum for youth ministry and volunteering to now laboring full-time for it.
Awesome. Sounds like there's going to be a lot of stories to tell.
Oh, yes. A lot of tea. Just kidding.
Talking about our team members, the volunteers that serve alongside us, because we know that just like Christians aren't supposed to follow Christ alone, those of us who are in ministry aren't, even in pastoral capacity, we're not called to shepherd the flock alone. And so we're going to be looking at more specifically what it looks like, not only to be able to bring in people from our churches to serve in youth ministry and how we could build out the on-ramps for that and how we could train them, but then also once they're in the trenches with us and they are laboring with us in their specific roles, how can we encourage them and keep them and also help them to continue to grow? We want them to experience a type of joy, even though it's in a different capacity perhaps than we do. We want them to experience that fullness of simply being able to personally make disciples in their lives with the students. And so the recruiting and retention aspects then of volunteers is what we're going to talk about today. So with that, I'm going to pick it up by asking Dorothy to open up this topic on recruitment, which sometimes is such like a scary buzzword in churches, right? When you hear that word, you're like, oh no, what is the pastor going to say now? What do they want us to do now? What are we supposed to give up now?
It's in the bulletin.
I know, read it.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, tell us more about how recruitment looks and what you have in mind when you're approaching it.
Yeah, I remember actually talking about this in another roundtable discussion with the Asian American Christian Collaborative. And something that we were talking about is how oftentimes when ministries are trying to recruit, they're looking for the people that they need.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that, because you do want to make sure that whoever is serving in your ministry, that they're capable, they're faithful, they're available, and they're teachable, right? But more importantly, I think that because I've seen how it is being in youth ministry since I was in high school up until now as being in my early 30s, I lean towards trying to develop the people that we need.
Oh, wow.
Because when I was studying my Master of Arts, I focused on spiritual formation and discipleship. Mm-hmm. And so really the concentration there is such that you're not always going to find the person that you need, but it's important to pour into people so that you're helping them to pursue Christ. You're walking with them. And as you do that, you're basically teaching them or modeling for them how it is to do that for others. it is a much more time intensive and in some ways laborious or very relational process that, to be honest, I think I'm probably more task oriented.
Hmm.
On the other hand, I've seen how God has been supremely humbling me as to why it is important to develop people rather than just constantly looking for the same types of people that will help the ministry to flourish.
Mm.
So I'll stop right there. I will have a story later, but I did also want to give Huey a chance to talk about his ministry too.
Oh yeah, I think I just rather want to hear from you.
Yeah,
That was so good. That was really inspiring.
end the podcast. No, I'm kidding.
No, I think for me it's similar vein. I want to make sure that whoever I invite or whatever the recruitment looks like, I want to make sure that they're in it because youth ministry is worth it.
Yes.
I never want to operate out of this mindset where like we need volunteers. So we're putting it in the bulletins. We're making announcements to the wider church. Like we need volunteers, like we're desperate. And that can be true, right? You can be in a situation where you're constantly needing volunteers, but I want to communicate that in such a way that it's youth ministry is actually worthwhile place to serve, right? And I think I think for me, there are a couple ways that that I've kind of learned to do that over the years. Is number one, I think it's worth it for the youth leader or the youth pastor or director to advocate for the youth ministry with their senior pastor or the
Absolutely.
EM pastor to say and just to share just a testimony or a grace story of how your past volunteers have grown and matured because they served in the youth ministry, not because they served out of a need, but they've really learned to follow and love Jesus through serving, right? So like highlight and platform youth ministry, youth pastors, youth directors in your church so you just cast a vision of why youth ministry is worth it. And I need to believe that too. Like just in my own heart, I need to believe that youth ministry is not a stepping stone to something better, right? Youth ministry is not like, it's not kind of this second class JV ministry. Youth ministry is part of the body of Christ, and if you're a member of a church, you gotta. It's important. That ministry is important enough that needs your time and your energy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, youth ministry is varsity, man. I mean, if you know, you
man.
know. It's like
That's
the
a real
hardest.
varsity. That's
you want
right.
the best.
That's right. Yeah, and similar to Dorothy too. I always want the youth volunteer for them to advocate and recruit for our ministry, right?
Yes,
because
absolutely.
the people that you are serving with, they know what it takes, right? They know what serving youth ministry is like. So, and if they're enjoying it, loving it, and even through all the sacrifices that they make, they're still in it because they love the youth ministry. I feel like they can be the greatest recruiters.
Yeah.
Right. So even if like they are stepping down for whatever reason, I ask them to, hey, is there somebody that you know that you feel like would actually really thrive and enjoy serving in this ministry? So I think those two are maybe just some practical ways that I've kind of went about just recruiting for volunteers in our ministry.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you guys are saying because I feel like, especially when there's that need, it really is easy for us to operate out of a mentality of scarcity. It's like, well, we got to plug the holes, we got to fill the slots. Otherwise, what are we going to do in ministry? But then ultimately, what we win them with is what we win them to, right? We want them to actually invest in the lives of the students because it's worth it in and of itself. And we want them to make disciples because God told us to. And this is like the best way to do it because most conversions happen. Most people choose to trust Christ under the age of 18. Like this is varsity stuff. Like you're going to get your kingdom right here in youth ministry.
Yeah.
And so what we win them to matters so much. So I really appreciate how you guys just have turned it and made it, so clear on how it is noble and worth it and eternal. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think Huey's main point of if they're going to be serving, they need to want to be there. They need to have that desire. And strangely enough, I'm reminded of when I watched the movie Pearl Harbor. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying there's a line in there because it's a World War II film, right? And one of the Baldwins, was it Alec Baldwin? Yeah, he's in there. He's like one of the generals who trains the pilots, and he's talking to Ben Affleck, and he's like, "Nothing is stronger than the heart of a volunteer." Right. Granted, this was about war and not to glorify that, but I mean, youth ministry in some sense is a battle in its own ways. But truly, like the persons who look to be in youth ministry, I mean, you're going to get some characters and some strong personalities, and maybe some people might not be a fit for youth ministry, but they're really willing to put themselves out there. And I think that initiative, it takes a lot of courage. There's some grit that's developed, or grit that's realized that they don't have as much as they thought. However, the fact is that if they want to be there and they want to grow, then they're not just serving particularly out of a need. They may say, what are the needs so I can fill it? But then I think if they're there out of functionality, then it's easy just to feel detached because once that need has been fulfilled or satisfied, or maybe has dissolved because ministry shifts, then they're like, oh, you don't need me, then I don't need to be here. It's like, that's not quite what I was hoping for. Not that I would strong arm them to stay. However, a desire to be present is truly crucial, on top of then wanting to see youth ministry as not a stepping stone, but as a very, very vital component in the part of the church.
Yeah. And not just part of the church, but like it's part of their spiritual growth too.
Absolutely.
Right? Serving is the way that you grow.
Right.
You're not serving to like expand the church, right? Like you're serving because you yourself want to grow. Right. And that's the vision, and that's the inspiration, right? Is like when you invite someone to serve, like don't just serve because we need you. Like you need the church, right? And you need the body of Christ, and you need to exercise your gifts, whatever that is. And if youth ministry is kind of in your sphere of influence, where you have the giftings and you have the time and you have the accessibility, like this might be the season where God is calling you to serve in this particular way so that you yourself can grow and mature.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you're not just there to pour yourself out to others. That's true. But you're there that through serving, you'll get more of Jesus. Through serving, you'll see the heart of Jesus. Like through serving, you'll be better equipped to serve in your workplaces or in your families. I think like serving in general is a vital part of your spiritual growth. And I think youth ministry has such it has something unique where just being with students, I feel like your heart goes wider and deeper. Right. So, like we need you. That's true. But you need us too, for your growth and character.
Yeah. One story to highlight, Huey, what you just said, how serving in youth ministry not just affects you personally, but how you engage with your work, or if you're a college student in your campus ministry of sorts. So I've a range of volunteers, and one of them is an elementary PE teacher, and he was sharing with our student leaders how we were evaluating the beginning of the year and the lessons that we've learned for some students who are in charge of planning games and executing announcements. And what they realized, long story short, is the students were not as prepared as I thought they would be. And my volunteer, who was also a deacon, he said, and that's okay, because it's good to make mistakes. It's good to learn in this environment because this is a safe place to learn and to make mistakes. But on top of that, the things that I learned here in youth ministry are things that he has been able to apply as an elementary PE teacher, right? And if they have like school events, or if he's in charge of helping to co-plan something, then a lot of what he's seen in youth ministry is directly applicable to a different context. And similarly, having some of my college helpers come on board, some of them have grown up within our youth ministry, but they are taking a lot of what they've learned to their campus ministries and applying those elements and those strategies there. So whether they are former students or they are currently serving as, more mature seasoned volunteers, Huey, you're absolutely right. That things that we are able to see and to grow in youth ministry. It transcends just youth ministry. It's very much applicable to other areas of ministry. But I think this is where our resilience is really built.
Yeah.
And patience. First it runs out and then it's built. Yeah.
I want to ask you, like, what are some stumbling blocks that you've seen in, potential volunteers where they already have their expectations set as to who would be good to work with students and it's not them?
Aside from the fact that life happens.
Yeah, that is one.
Sorry, not to commandeer the conversation. I know that most youth ministries tend to have persons in their 20s serving more often than not. And the thing is, unless you're willing to, I'll backtrack. My youth ministry, we meet on Friday nights. For a typical college or working adult, Friday nights are like date nights, or hang out with your friends and play board games, or go see a movie, or go out to a nicer dinner or a concert, etc. Unless you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of your social life, I'm not saying this is for everyone, but if you're willing to do that, like, the returns spiritually are so much greater. But socially, you may be feeling a little bit out of the loop with your peers who are capitalizing on their leisure, just to put it objectively, right? So a stumbling block then is life happens when people are hanging out and it's like, oh, relationships are springing up, or someone is again engaged again, or someone's getting married, having kids, they're moving away. So I think there's this not fixation, but there is this desire to move on to the next stage of life. And that doesn't always involve serving in youth ministry. Even if someone has a minute desire, unless that materializes into some type of conviction of follow-up, I think that it's something else may be prioritized. And not saying that's a wrong thing, but like Huey said earlier in our conversation, they really have to want to be there. And if that's the case, it will show. And I think that words can be aplenty, but actions are really more demonstrative of the heart too.
Yeah, and maybe what I would add to what Dorothy just said is, I think one other stumbling block might be that, and I mentioned this before, I think generally speaking, they do feel ill-equipped to do it, to do the work. It's not just about their time, but
like inadequacy.
Yeah, just feeling inadequate, feeling like they don't have much to offer. They themselves were not discipled, maybe when they were growing up. Maybe they met Jesus and started following Jesus in college, and they're just only about 4 or 5 years removed from that life stage, and they're still growing as a Christian. So the responsibility feels overwhelming to be able to lead somebody else, and I think that's legitimate. You got to pay attention to that. How do we help those that feel ill-equipped? How do we equip them along the way so that they feel like they have what it takes to lead others? And I think that's a big part of what youth pastors and directors need to do going forward, So, that's what I hear often, I think.
Yeah, let's talk about that then. Let's transition to this idea of volunteer retention. How do we continue to build them up, but then also to point them to this grand vision of disciple making for the long run? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think, and that's just kind of my personal, experience too within the last couple of years is, I hear more and more stories of the volunteers that I get to work with. They're saying, and they're resonating with this idea of like, I just feel ill-equipped to do what we're asking them to do, right? So I think naturally for me, this is kind of where I think my role as a youth pastor has shifted over the years, where I am more hands-on in terms of pastoring and shepherding our leaders as much as I am doing directly with students, right? So, for example, I try to create a space for our youth leaders to feel like we're not just serving together, but we're actually doing life and ministry together, so that what they do with their students is an extension of what they experience within our ministry volunteer culture,
Mhm.
So, like example would be this past year or the last 2 years, we actually, our volunteers, our youth ministry volunteers, we became our small group. Right.
Mm.
So like our church, has like many other churches, if not all churches, have a small group system
Mhm.
where members and regular attenders are part of like these community groups or small groups or family groups. So our youth ministry volunteers became a small group in and of itself. So that on top of when they're serving as youth volunteers, we're actually gathering on we gather on a Wednesday night. We don't talk about youth ministry at all, right? We just talk about we actually went through the book of Galatians together because that was our church's sermon series.
Mhm.
Mm.
We had sermon discussion and we went through the book of Galatians together, just for us. So that we're eating together, we're fellowshipping together, we are studying the word together, so that we live this way together. And so by the time our youth ministry event comes around, they're just replicating what we've experienced together on our own. So
Oh,
our
that's so
youth
good.
ministry feels like we feel like we're family. We're like
Yeah,
we're family. Like we're not
absolutely.
just clocking in and clocking out, but we're constantly around each other, that when we're serving together, it just feels natural,
Mm.
you know. So that was a big change, but I really do feel like it was a welcome change
Mhm.
for a lot of volunteers because they felt like they're not just kind of expending themselves out, but they're being poured into, not
Mhm.
just by me, but one another. There's a sense of togetherness. There's a sense of unity. There's a sense of like we're in the trenches together, not just kind of on the youth group events days. So
Mhm.
it definitely takes a lot more time and commitment, but I do think it's a time and commitment that they're willing to invest in so that they can do ministry together with the ones that they're serving with. So that's been a really good life-giving change for us and especially for me too.
I think one of the big things about retention and equipping, because, being fresh in youth ministry, you're always looking for training or you're always looking for ways to grow and expand, not just your skill set or maybe discover your spiritual gifts, but to cultivate and nurture those areas of improvement too, or of growth. What I've tried to do is periodically, when I say periodically, like maybe every 2 to 3 months, is organize a training. In the past, we've had trainings with dealing with students with special needs. We've had multiple ones at that because we do have a specialist or a few specialists in our church who are able to offer that type of training. We've had training about ministering to students amidst mental health crises because we have some local Christian counselors in the area who've been able to facilitate that. Training and equipping, there's no shortage of it. It's just actually finding a more concrete time and day
Mhm.
where it would be well attended or that our team could feel motivated to actually participate. I think sometimes if you try to get too many people into a training, as efficient as it is, then it kind of loses a little bit of its value or its focused nature and effectiveness for youth ministry in and of itself. But still, having training is more important and it's better than not having any training.
Mhm.
And then, secondly, while I would love for my youth volunteers and I to become a small group, the fact is because we're so multi-generational and multi-congregational at that, there are a number of individuals who are involved in other cell groups and support groups, or
Mhm.
they're deacons and deaconesses for other ministries, or that their kids are in the youth group. And so if we have get-togethers, they can't just be left at home. They're coming over to fellowship or have dinner with us. So if we're not training or equipping, then we try to at least once a month do a get together. Although that's been a little bit difficult because as our volunteers are involved in other ministries, it's just so hard to figure out, do we want to do like a Saturday afternoon, evening, maybe a Sunday? Do we want to do training at the same time because that may allow for budget coverage in our policy? So I think that sometimes we're just trying to be strategic about how we get together, whether it be fellowship or functional, or it is just purely for like administrative things, because everyone has such a limited schedule and availability
Sure.
that I personally, as much as I want to fellowship more, I don't want to keep adding to their calendars.
Yeah.
So it's like, again, caught between a rock and a hard place of how much do we want to offer and make available, like practical and less formal gathering settings, but still to encourage each other. And sometimes I think I find that it's just better to do that. Better meaning that it's less taxing to do that individually than it is as a group. But I think that's just, again, the season of ministry that we're in and different life stages. But we do definitely try to get together at least 3 times a year, whether for planning meetings or holiday gatherings or celebrations. And I think celebration is also an important discipline that we have in our group, is that there's a season and a time for everything. And we acknowledge all that goes into what it takes to be in youth ministry. And I respect these volunteers so much because of it. They're multitasking, they're stretching themselves, they are growing, even if it doesn't feel good and it's for our good, as it says in Romans, right? That the Lord works all things for our good, but everyone's going through something. So I'm just very cognizant of that. And I want to try to, like Huey said, do as much to support those who serve rather than trying to quote unquote get more out of them, right? I never want to make it seem like I'm using volunteers because longevity and sustainability are extremely important to me. And even more so that our volunteers make sure that they know that they feel cared for, not that they're just fulfilling a specific need.
And like when it comes to volunteer retention, there isn't a specific formula for it, right? I think your context matters a lot. So I think that's why I think for youth pastors and directors and leaders, it's so important for us to have friends who are kind of friends who are in ministry, and so that you can kind of have these kinds of conversations, and you can hear some ideas and that might work for you, and then you give it a shot. So I mean that's why I appreciate Rooted so much. I feel like Rooted always emphasizes relationships, not just like content, but like relationships, and it connects us to other people that can have these conversations, so that you can glean things that you can try and implement in your own context. I just don't think it's never a one size fits all for youth ministry. Right? So I think friendships are important for youth leaders and pastors and directors.
Yeah, I appreciate what you guys are saying. I mean, the people that serve with us, they are actually people with lives and people that we're called to shepherd and invest in as well, not just like pieces in our ministry projects and people to plug in needs. And so it's so great for us to be mindful and constantly being aware of how they're doing. And when they need breaks, sometimes we should understand that and think of ways in which we could structure that as well into the ministry schedule so that they could take a breather and they could sustain for the long run. All right. Well, it's really great talking to you guys. And thank you all for listening today to the Rooted Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable. We look forward to the next time we chat. Until then, may the Lord bless you and keep you as we trust in the death and resurrection of Christ to transform the peoples in our homes and churches. Be sure to follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also find us on Instagram at The Rooted Ministry. Talk with you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable, part of the Rooted family of podcasts. You can go even deeper into gospel-centered, Bible-saturated youth ministry by listening to our other podcasts, including the Rooted Youth Ministry Podcast and the Rooted Parent Podcast. Find them all at rootedministry.com.
We are so excited to share that we have a new opportunity for folks working in family ministry. The Rooted Family Ministry Mentorship Program. It provides both small group and individual coaching for volunteers, youth pastors, or associate pastors who oversee family ministry in their church context. This 12-month program includes small groups of 6 to 8 led by one mentor in both a cohort and an individual setting through a carefully crafted curriculum designed to help you grow spiritually as an individual and as a leader in your congregation. At the end of the program, we expect you'll be prepared to equip the volunteers and parents in your congregation to disciple the next generation to know and love Jesus. Additionally, when you complete the program, you'll receive a Rooted Family Ministry certificate to affirm your commitment to join God in the work He is doing in the lives of the families you serve.